Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Saturday morning of the International Space Development Conference. Thank you all for getting up so early. We have an excellent show for you this morning. We have Dr. Mae Jemison, and she's going to tell us a lot about what starships will look like about 100 years from now, so I'm pretty excited about that. Got a couple announcements. Tonight we have in this room, for those that can't afford these low-priced dinners, we've got Mars movie night with Jerry Williams. And tonight it's Trip to Mars from 1910 and Postcards from the Future 2007, and then a movie called Mars that came out in 2010. Jerry Williams is our local expert on Mars movies. He's also our expert on the Mars Society. He's been working with the Desert Research Station in Utah for about 10 years, or whenever it opened, basically. He's one of the people that first set that up. We have books in the lobby from Buzz Aldrin. Buzz is going to be our lunchtime speaker. And after lunch, from 2 until whenever, he's going to be signing books. So this is a huge opportunity for anyone interested in having a piece of history. On that note, I'm going to turn you over to one of our strongest supporters in the National Space Society, Claire McMurray. She wrote an article recently in the last Ad Astra Woman honoring the last 50 years of women in space. She's an expert on what goes on within the Space Society, as well as, well, she's laughing now. I guess you gotta fake it, girl. That's what I'm doing up here. All right, at this point, I'm gonna turn it over to Claire. So thank you, Dr. Jemison.
How many of you are here at your very first ISDC? Okay, congratulations. Well, you all might not know that this is held in a different city every year with a different team leading it. And next year we'll be in Los Angeles. There are flyers about it at the registration table and at the chapters table. Anyone here from a National Space Society chapter? Okay. You should know that the chapter's assembly is tonight after the banquet. We don't know the room yet. Okay. Our speaker.
Let's go ahead and make that in room 232.
Room 232. Okay. I have admired Dr. Jemison for a long time, but I didn't know as much about her as there is to know at all. Okay, NASA astronaut. Most of us would love to have been a NASA astronaut, but there's more. She flew on STS, forgive me here, 47. I've had an eye operation and I'm forbidden to read, so this is cheating here. and after that, she retired from NASA, but before that, do you want to be helpful to humanity? Dr. Jemison was a Peace Corps medical officer in 2 African countries with occasional responsibilities for other African countries before NASA. Do you want to, engage in the culture? Dr. Jemison is a dancer. And, okay, arts and science, 2 different things, but Dr. Jemison is an engineer. She's pretty much got us covered, and besides which, actress and entrepreneur. Okay, and I suspect that often it's the entrepreneurs who follow the dreamers, sometimes are the dreamers, and get us where we want to go. And I found out last night, Dr. Jemison has a quick-witted sense of humor. A delightful person. So I'm going to keep this very, very short because you didn't come to hear me. So without more ado, Dr. Mae Jemison, and I said it wrong all this time.
Good morning. I am actually very, very excited to be here today. And what I want to do is to share with you some thoughts and ideas, not just about this project 100 Year Starship, but the whole idea about space exploration, why we do it, and why I'm particularly interested and committed to the future of humans in space. Let me just start off, I'll tell you a little bit more about my background. I was born in Alabama, actually in Decatur, Alabama. For all of you who know, it's like right next door to Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. And my father actually was a roofer when they were building Redstone Arsenal. And he told that story to me. And before I was an astronaut, I really didn't know what that meant, right? But I grew up in Chicago, and I always considered Chicago my hometown. But during the 1960s was the time when there was the Apollo era, all those kinds of things were happening. And it was very exciting for me because I assumed I would be part of a space future. But looking back, people would sort of ask me, why did I assume that? Because all throughout what folks saw as the image of space exploration, this is different. The kids are sitting there in the blue shirts and stuff. You guys don't know about this, but I'm going to just inform you of it. It wasn't one that was inclusive or included people who necessarily looked like me. And that is a woman or a person of color. And so people sort of asked, you know, yeah, it's really great we got to the moon, hurrah, but what does that have to do with us? It has to do with our future, and it's something that everyone has been involved with. Throughout the ages, every society, every civilization has had astronomers. They've noted the movement of the stars. They're part of our first technologies. And so I felt that it was very much a part of what I wanted to do. So let me give you one other notion right now before I jump in. And there are 86,400 seconds in each Earth day. And each one of those seconds is extremely precious because we can do with each of those seconds exactly as we please, but we can never get a single one of those seconds back. So I want to, first of all, say thank you for spending some of your time with me here at this conference, and I promise you that I'm going to try to at least put a little bit of a different perspective in it and really share some of the seconds I've had. First thing I'd like to do is to show you a video that's a manifesto for 100 Year Starship. And we're going to see whether or not we can figure out how to do this. There are all kinds of things going up. So have you ever noticed that the technological component that's going to keep us from going anywhere is actually our AV capabilities? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are. And note that they work very well at home, right? Just like any kind of test article, it works very well at home when you're by yourself, but no. So let me just tell you what 100 Year Starship is. That's a PowerPoint. Yeah. Let me just tell you a little bit about 100 Year Starship. It was an organization that was started to make sure that we have the capabilities over the next 100 years of sending a human to another star. It has nothing to do with us creating a mission, but really making sure that within the next 100 years, if someone decides they want to mount such a mission, that all the capabilities and the possibilities of doing that are there. So, So our mission statement is 100 Year Starship will pursue the national and global initiatives, galvanize public and private leadership, as well as grassroots support to ensure that human travel beyond our solar system into another star can be a reality within the next century. 100 Year Starship will unreservedly dedicate itself to identifying and pushing the radical leaps in knowledge and technology needed to achieve interstellar flight while pioneering and transforming breakthrough applications to enhance the quality of life on Earth. And we will actively include the broadest swath of people in understanding and shaping and implementing our mission. I read the mission statement directly because it really embodies all of the visions, all of the things that we're interested in. Again, it goes back to the fact that when I was growing up as a little girl, so many people did not see themselves as part of space exploration, yet it has been a part of all of our lives throughout the world. Now, I know that everybody here already knows the scale of the Interstellar Challenge, but I'm just going to repeat it because I think it's that scale that puts things in perspective by why it's a little bit different than space exploration within our solar system, and also why it offers an incredible opportunity to be able to enhance and transform life on Earth. In fact, the name of our proposal that won as a DARPA award was, very first word, inclusive. An inclusive, audacious journey transforms life here on Earth and beyond. And that is what's really important. It's a transformation in how we can change what happens here on Earth. So let's talk about the scale of the Interstellar Challenge. We're just going to do that really well. So imagine we're in Los Angeles or San Diego. It's just a little bit different in the scale. And we would need to go to New York City. And imagine that Earth is the same as Los Angeles, and Alpha Centauri is the same as New York City, our closest, star system. So if we were Voyager, which has been traveling at somewhere around 35,000 miles per hour since 1977, it would take us over 70,000 years to get to New York City, traveling at the speed we are right now. Another way to look at it is, on that journey, since 1977, Voyager has only traveled 1 mile. 70,000 years ago, we weren't even cave painting well. So it means that we have to go much faster. And even as we start to go much faster, we have to think of other things, because even if we some kind of way figure out how to go 10% of light speed, right? And we're able to cut the journey down to 50 years or something like that, you still have a whole nother set of issues in terms of sustainability and other things that you don't necessarily know how to handle. That's what the scale of the Interstellar Challenge is. So the big thing that comes to bear, because this has happened to me all the time, is it even reasonable? If we think about it, H.G. Wells, when he wrote First Man on the Moon back in 1901, it was absolutely fantastical that anything like that can happen. But it was less than 70 years later when humans first walked on the moon. And I always like to point out that right now our technological arc, the arc of our technology, understanding and development, is much steeper than it was then. So the other thing that's happened to me is, as I've gone around over this last year trying to understand some of the pieces and look at some of the capabilities, we have much more available than I even thought that there was possibilities. So I become even much more hopeful, but it's always about that push. So why would 100-Year Starship come up? It was actually started again as an initiative by DARPA, the same folks who ended up bringing us the internet and global positioning satellite systems, a lot of those exoskeletons. They also did research on ESP and stuff like that, right? But it's those things that we don't know about, those things that actually push us. The idea behind 100-Year Starship was that it was about making sure the kinds of explosive innovation that happened during the Apollo program might be able to happen now. How do we get something that's such a challenge that'll happen now? The first thing that we're looking at is a revitalization and boost of science and technology innovation and inspiring people to have science careers. One of the offsets of Apollo program was there was a lot of folks who went into science, and they weren't necessarily going into space sciences, but there was this explosion around science. We know that we need that now. I don't have to talk about that. You all already know that. A North Star, that is something that has a very high impact. There are transdisciplinary collaborations among universities, governments, industries. Okay, we got to go through all of this. Then there's a knowledge application, being able to take some of the work that has been developed for a certain program and be able to apply it in other places, job creation. But what I think the other reason for why 100-Year Starship is to accelerate the development of technologies and scientific discovery by considering something really, really difficult. And it also has to be something that inspires people, that people want to rally around. And then finally, looking at a grand challenge, something that's bigger than ourselves. I always like to also add that I think what the incredible thing about something like space exploration in general, but particularly interstellar space, is the adrenaline rush. And the adrenaline rush is not one that's about just the physical daring and challenge. It's about the challenge to ourselves as individuals. Right now, as humans, we're getting our adrenaline rush from some very interesting places that are probably not that helpful for our species. And so what we need to do is to figure out how to change that. If you think about the impact of the pursuit of the interstellar journey, and again, I know I'm talking to the choir, but I want to go down these things as we look at them. Energy, that's the first thing. But it's not just energy. It's not just being able to go from, chemical rockets to fusion or from chemical rockets to fission to fusion to antimatter. It's about even being able to harness and store and control those kinds of energy. If you start to change that in space, then we start to be able to apply that on Earth. It's about propulsion. It's about big data, right? It's about navigation and sensing. It's about understanding how to design something that is that complicated, that sophisticated, whether the design becomes very complicated or whether the design needs to be simplistic. It's about sustainable agriculture. It's about manufacturing breakthroughs, understanding how to build things differently. It's about being able to communicate. It's about financial innovation and methodologies. It's about human health. So it really spans the breadth and the width of human experience. Let me tell you a little bit about how we're organized. 100-Year Starship was actually started under the Dorothy Jemison Foundation for Excellence. And the Dorothy Jemison Foundation for Excellence was a 501c3 that was named after my mother, who was a school teacher in the Chicago Public Schools for over 25 years. And she always believed that you can't necessarily be number one, but you can be excellent in what you do. And since 1994, when we really started, we started with a science literacy program called The Earth We Share. We've been holding science camps and different programs since then. And when this opportunity to apply for the RFP came up, we did it under the Dorothy Jemison Foundation. But the idea is that 100-Year Starship will be a nonprofit, is a nonprofit central organizing organization with a number of things attached to them. One of them is the Way Research Institute, which I'll spend a little bit more time talking about, eponymously named, right? Really easy, the Way. And then key affiliate kind of organizations, which includes an advisory council, it includes a science board, and the ability to spin off for-profit things if you want to. Why do we want to spin those off? Because you don't want to change the purpose. Right? You don't want the purpose to change. It's so easy to say, oh, you're making money here, let's go that way and let's forget what we're doing because this is where you can make money. This is what people want to support. But if you have a purpose, it needs to stay there and be central. Then the other piece of it is to build consortia and coalitions, to be able to involve lots of different people in this. And if you notice on that diagram, there are no hard lines between the consortia and 100-Year Starship, because that's not the purpose. The only way that this can happen is if a lot of different people consider it important, and you have a way to let entertainers to be involved, you have a way for different storytellers to be involved, the humanitarians, visionaries, business leaders, there is a way for them to be involved and there is something for them to do. So that is a really big part of it. That's our overall structure if you want to look at it. We're interested in helping to foster this. It's not just, oh, 100-Year Starship is doing it. There's no way any one organization can do all of this. It has to be fostered. So, examples of partnerships that we already have, just looking through things, but I want you to notice that some of the things we said, we are actually working with the European Union in Brussels. We're working with the Da Vinci Institute in, I clearly need something else here. Is that next? Yeah. No, that's not what I want to do. I want to do previous. Okay. So, Shanghai, China, because we started this off really at the beginning as an international organization, and we want to be able to build more partnerships and relationships because, again, no one country, no one individual organization can make any of this happen. And so you really want to generate something that becomes a global aspiration. And we're looking for many more. This is just some of the things. Let me go to the Way Research Institute. The Way Research Institute is about fostering and coordinating and initiating the kind of research and development necessary to achieve human interstellar flight. I think the key word in there is foster. Nobody's going to do all of this. There are lots of different pieces that are going on in lots of different places. And it's to be able to understand that and be able to rally and promote it. It's about emphasizing also for those pushes, those radical leaps in technological advancement whenever possible, right? Instead of creating those incremental things. Let me tell you the difference between the incremental versus the radical leaps. These days, we're all talking about energy, right? That's a big issue. That's the reason there are wars, all these kind of things are happening. But when we start looking at energy, very many people with the fossil fuel community, whatever, they're like, well, if we can figure out how to do fracking, if we can figure out how to just push this fossil fuel piece just a little bit further, then we'll make a difference. So that's a very short-sighted, very small incremental response. How do you get a larger response? By saying, we need a completely different solution. We know chemicals will not make it to another star system. There's no way to store enough. There's necessarily no way to harvest enough. But you can look at making some of these other things happen. That's the difference between incremental. It's finding out, for example, that people actually are working on antimatter, which I didn't know. I thought it was just in CERN, and you need these huge places to store it and stuff. There are folks who are doing much more radical work on that. So it's a leap forward. And so you really want to push those kinds of things, those kinds of ideas, instead of the small incremental pieces. Another one, now everybody knows I was at NASA. My background is chemical engineering, and I'm a medical doctor as well. And so you can imagine while I was at NASA, I spent a lot of time on the life sciences and working with the medical folks and stuff. But when we start looking at what happens to humans in space, and I'm going to use that as an example later on, we start to say, well, can we do little things to keep them healthy for periods of time? Maybe there's a whole radical way we need to look at that and what happens and what it is to be human. Some people say whether it's doing cyber mechanisms, right? Or whether it's to simplify and look at how do we optimize humans without medications. There are different ways to look at that you're pushed by something as difficult as interstellar. So looking at the radical leaps forward. You want to really push research and technology so you translate the discoveries that we have to life on Earth every day right now. Because one of the disconnects, we talk about spin-offs, but a spin-off is something that just sort of happened, right? It just sort of happened. What we want to look at is a purposeful application of the technological design and development. So global positioning satellite systems, those were purposeful applications, but they sort of just happened into some of the other systems, but they're very widespread now. Could we look at things like remote sensing for land and crop management? Those kinds of ideas in developing countries. That people don't think about them as being related to space. Let's look at the purposeful application. So that's one of the places that we're going. And also, where we're looking at is beginning as a virtual institute with distributed management, leveraging existing facilities. The focus is on development and not physical construction. And then finally, we're composed of outstanding subject matter experts spanning the range of fields critical to 100-year Starship. And I would say that's all of human experience. Because the reality is, if we figure out how to send humans to another star, they're probably not going to come back right away. The successful ones who make it there are probably not going to do a turnaround. I'm just saying. So again, what we're looking at is promoting a transdisciplinary R&D and workshops that will include the full range of human experience and knowledge. We're looking at bleeding edge. Those things that are so difficult, so off the wall that a lot of people won't pay any attention to them, they won't get funded. But you really have to pay attention to these things. This is particularly important when we're in a society right now that as you start to look at the government funding organizations, they ask more and more for people to tell you, what are you going to do with your research within the next 5 years? How is it going to affect commercial things, right? I mean, when you apply for grants, that's what they're asking. So we need to really be able to push those kinds of things that you can't tell the immediate application, but you know they need to happen, and actively apply that knowledge and develop the capability to map knowledge. The Research Institute's places are destinations. Space sciences, for example, exobiology, exoplanets, astrobiology. Notice the way we collected these together is a little bit different. People, human in the loop, all those kinds of things, which include behavior, ethics, sociology, which is very frequently left out. But if you were to ask me what the long pole in the tent is, it's going to be people and their behavior. Just like in the long pole in the tent right now, in terms of surviving on this planet, is people and our behavior, right? Energy, habitats, energy, IT, material systems, how technology, people, and organizations and ecologies work together. It's really important because this is systems engineering. And finally, hardware demonstrations focused on building and implementation, and an ongoing engine of ideas focused on mission specifics and strategic technology capitalization. Note that this is not, sorry, one slide got in there that was left. But again, we're looking at a strategic plan. Long-term capabilities, 5, 10, 20 years. Capabilities and current knowledge. We're looking at holding transdisciplinary conference every 3 years, and that conference will include all the tracks, everybody talking about things together, and a formal opportunity for this multidisciplinary cross-fertilization. I think that that is the key. We already know that. I'm not using the word interdisciplinary, I'm using the word transdisciplinary, because none of these things, none of the solutions we look for will happen in and of themselves. We're looking at 5-year strategic plans. Maybe that's even too long, because as I found out this year, things are much different. The landscape is much different than I thought. And the objectives beyond 20 years must be flexible, and they center around concepts and philosophical longevity. There are no roadmaps. One of the biggest things I've had to fight against is the whole idea that you can create a technological roadmap, because I don't think we know the technologies that are out there. We know the capabilities, the type of capabilities that are needed, but as soon as you tie a technology to it, then you've already said that some of the other things that we haven't even thought of may not be a part of it. Transdisciplinary university programs, we want to integrate a multitude of research philosophies for various fields, being able to provide systems to view systems view to the participants and investors. We want to encourage active research translation. Let me just give you an example of why some of these things are important and why we talk about the Research Institute this way. So I'm just going to talk about life science issues. Because I know you have some life science tracks, right? But a lot of people in these kind of places end up in the propulsion, right? And those kind of vehicle tracks. So let's talk about life science issues. You need health. This is the medical stuff, the trauma, the aging, the disease, the mental health. You need to understand about governance and economy, right? The further you get away from home base, the less likely people are to maintain the governance system that's based on the law and order that we think of here, because you really are beyond the long arm of the law, right? So we really need to understand what makes people behave like they do and participate in governance. Economy. Economy both in being able to develop something like this where, as opposed to asteroid mining, where you say you're going to bring the materials back to Earth and you're going to use them in this system, that's not probably going to happen for a long time. So what would be the economics of investing in a venture like this? I have to rethink that. Then what are the economics on the vehicle itself? What do you exchange? We think of economy these days as something that's set in stone, but it's not. It's just a mechanism of exchanging goods and services. So what are the goods and services that will be exchanged when you're either on the vehicle, if people are still awake, or when you get to wherever you're going, or even if you reconstitute the folks, right? And you build them from a DNA slush. I mean, there are people who say, let's do it from a DNA slush. I'm not putting anything out. I have some biases. But still, what is going to be the economy of it? Clothing, identity, and protection. This is something that came from a professor who was at the University of Rhode Island School of Design. And he said he heard about 100 Year Starship, And he said, you know, this poses a completely different problem because the way clothes are worked with in space right now is not viable in the future. And I'm going to do something. His name is Dr. Carl Espelon, and I'm going to tell you what Carl Espelon does. And I'm going to just do it right now. How many of you have sewn a garment? How many of you have actually sewn a garment from the beginning to the end? Not just hemming. Everybody who just hem stuff, put your hands down. Okay, I want the people who put in the shoulder pads, the zippers, everything else. If you didn't put in a zipper, put your hand down. Okay? So it looks something like this. Actually, this group has a lot more sewers than most groups do. Why does he say that? He said, because if your hand isn't up, you can't go. Because you need to know how to make your own clothes. Because it is impossible to carry enough clothes up with you, like we do now, and shuttle them back and forth in order for something like this to happen. Then the materials have to be recyclable. We all love cotton. But cotton is very difficult and nasty to grow, and it's hard. You can't recycle it. But you can recycle polyester. And as soon as I say the word polyester, we go back to the 70s leisure suits. And we think, oh no. But we think, oh no. But we have to start thinking about things differently. Why are clothes important? Some people say, well, don't just leave the clothes off. Forget all about that. But clothes provide protection, right? But they also provide identity. I mean, even in the future science fiction movies, there's an extra little star. It's very subtle, but you have to look. There's a little bit of thing that says you're a little bit different. Clothes provide identity. So how do these things interact? So we have to look at, there's a very large technological challenge, and there's a very large behavioral challenge that's included in this. Let's look at training and education. We don't necessarily know how to train people for something like this. Do you keep training? Do you keep educating? What do you educate for? What do you carry on? Activities and behavior, what becomes acceptable? Isolation, social structures that endure, culture and identity. I have a thing here saying Nikki Giovanni quilting the black-eyed pea, we're going to Mars. This is where it becomes important to have all different kinds of people here. Nikki Giovanni is a poet. And she is well known for poems like Ego Trippin' about black women and assertion of confidence and things. She's fascinated by space. She loves space. But in Quilting the Black-Eyed Peas, We're Going to Mars, she talks about how it will be incredible to go to Mars, but how do you maintain your identity? What identity do you take? And what kind of an analogy can you use to think about this? She suggests the analogy of slaves being taken, African slaves being taken from their home and going someplace that they don't know, and you lose sight of the shore. And you really don't know what you're going to end up with on the other side. What is the level of resilience that allowed a people to continue on under those circumstances? There are lots of different analogies that we can look at. But I really want to say that when we talk about, when she says quilting the black-eyed pea, it's that we're going to be able to do this, but we have to think about ourselves and our identity. That comes from the point of view of a poet. So these are all sort of life science issues in space exploration. Now, what I did include in there was all the exobiology. What happens? Do you go to a sterile place or a non-sterile place? Sterile meaning there's no life there. You know, what do you do? But those are human issues. And examples that force us to reconsider current assumptions, things like crew selection, the number and type for genetic diversity and population viability. Can't necessarily just be the usual suspects, because we need to have that genetic diversity and the viability. And how big does a population be? You might be able to get the genetic diversity in 100 people, but is that really a viable population size for when the disease happens to go through, or when I just can't stand you any longer and there's too many of us and I've seen you just way too many times? Those are the pieces we have to do when we talk about population viability. Who selects? Is it volunteers? Is it family? Is it singles? Is it educational levels? What do we need to have in there? That selection process is very different. Cybernetics. Now, this is where people talk about human performance and survival that's optimized by integration with IT systems and machines. Or is it understanding and optimizing innate human potential? Just think about it. If you do this with machines, then you're going to need to be able to duplicate those machines if something happens to them later on. And in fact, these days, we've almost, here on Earth, stopped thinking about the fact that we have an incredible machine that is our body. And you can't even call it a machine, because we don't know how it works that well, but it's incredible. But we've stopped optimizing it. We stopped thinking about that. So this forces us to think about things differently. That's what that interstellar perspective does. And then communication with others. Do you want them to keep talking to you? Will they want to keep talking to you? Do they turn into something very different just because of the distance? And what does that mean? So that whole communications piece changes. And then if you just want to just talk about communications in general, language changes, right? So the population, the slang, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, all of those things change. This gives us another perspective to think about ourselves. We can opt for human potential optimization with minimal tech. It may not be able to be maintained, or we can go, it's not complicated to maintain and construct. Ethics of no return. Will this change us? Right now, everybody always says that we have to come back. All right, most missions that are done now assumes that people are going to come back, or they're in some relationship. You have some opportunity to come back. Is that needed? Is that necessary? Pharmaceuticals and medication. You grow and refine, otherwise you might be dependent on resources that are not available. So you have to, all of a sudden it's starting to push what we think about in terms of pharmaceuticals and in terms of medication, because you need to be able to produce that where you are. So you can't have any substrates or other things that you can't produce. Aging and population growth. Is it an individual or societal decision? Do I get to have as many babies as I want? Do I get to have as many cats as I want? I'm voting for the cats. But is this an individual or societal decision? All of a sudden we have to think of things differently, because you can't necessarily have as many folks as you want in this small confined place with only a certain number of resources. So then how do you decide who gets to replicate themselves? Biodiversity, genetic engineering, and criticality of purposely maintaining and culling the population of different types. I'm not just talking about human populations, about plants that you may take to grow with you. So all of a sudden it makes us focus on things a bit differently. That is what we're talking about, the perspective. So other non-human things, flora and fauna to take. What microbes need to go? We're always right now, how many people were taking their, what is that stuff you wipe your hands in? Your antibacterial stuff, right? You have that around, you wipe your hands. You need those microbes. We need them with us, but we don't know which ones we need. We know that right now, when we have problems with our growing things, we can bring microbes from other places, put them in the soil to nourish the soil. You know that plants, that trees really can't grow unless they have all these microbes on the roots in the soil to actually trap nitrogen and do other things. But if from time to time, they actually wear out, so we need to know what we need to take with us. So we need to understand much better what proportion it is. It's something that we're thinking about now, but we haven't spent that much time and money on it. Our gut, we could not absorb our food unless we had these millions of microbes in our gut in the right proportion. We don't understand that now. We need to pay attention to it. Target destinations, evidence of life are sterile. Language and communication, just in case, right? Synthetic life and organisms, people talk about terraforming. I'm good? Yes. Okay. 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit longer since it took us long. Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to go over your time. So those are some of the things that I wanted to tell you why this brings a different perspective. So what our priority is public engagement. The things that we've been involved in the 2012 symposium that we had in Houston. It was the first thing, one of the first things that we did. And that symposium dealt with issues of transition to transformation. We stood at a place where it was just about the 50th anniversary of Johnson Space Flight Center. It was the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy giving the moon speech. So we have to transition from our old way of thinking about space exploration to a new way of thinking about space exploration. So our symposium really gathered around that. One of the things we wanted to do is to make sure everybody felt that they could be involved with the symposium, that everyone can come and have something to offer. So from that way, we had a number of different tracks. You all have very similar tracks. We put them together in different ways. How do we encourage different folks to come? We're working with school children and teachers, and with this different focus and encouraging people to come. What if online forum? You know, what if we had to do a Starship in 2020? It's just for something happened, we had to do it. What tin can would you put together? But it's really to get a way for people to be able to continue to live ideas. Scholastic True Books. We have a 100-year Starship imprint with Scholastic, the children's publisher collaboration, where we actually are creating 4 titles every year. We already have 4 titles out. One of them is a 100-year Starship, exploring our star, the sun, journey through the solar system, which is done from the point of view of probes, and also discovering new planets, which really talks about exoplanets. We want to have students learning things as quickly as possible in different ways. And by the way, they're really good primers for other folks as well. Membership, where people have an opportunity to be involved with different things. An amazing screensaver. I meant to put it up, but you know, considering our video problems, we're part of a panel of South by Southwest, so going to places that folks don't go, we want to bring those up. And I understand being a featured panel at South by Southwest is a big deal, and we were a featured panel. Our website, our educator workshops, we've been working with a number of different people. The public symposium, our honorary chair to begin with was President Bill Clinton. We wanted to have, and he actually sent a video to be able to talk with us about it. And somebody said, he actually said 100-year Starship and he'd like to go. So we really had a number of different things and different people being involved. Some of the ideas and pictures from 100-year Starship. As I told you, 1 year and counting, those are some of the things we're doing. And I'm just going to go back to something. I talked about the 60s and how many people thought that they couldn't be involved. And one of the things, I majored in chemical engineering in college, but I also majored in African and African American studies, mostly in African studies and linguistics and politics. And one of the most respected leaders was Julius Nyerere from Tanzania. And he said, while they were trying to reach the moon, we were trying to reach the village. My determination is that with 100-year Starship, we will do both. We will reach the moon and the village and beyond that, because that's what's important. This is all based on an idea that an African proverb says, no one shows a child the sky. This is something that we do. To me, the most incredible thing about space exploration isn't Voyager, even though that's probably second. I think Voyager, you know, something going outside the confines of our solar system is just like, it's spine-tingling, right? But the most incredible thing is the fact that one of my ancestors, thousands of generations before me, looked up at the sky and said, you know what? About 10 years ago, you see that speck right there? It was right there. What? Can you imagine the observational skills that it took and just the mental capacity it took to figure out the stars were moving and to plot the times and everything without photographic plates, with no computers, no Excel spreadsheets, none of that kind of stuff. But that's what our work is based on. No one shows a child the sky. It is part of us. That is what we're looking at. And so our whole task is having an inclusive, audacious journey that transforms life here on Earth and beyond. That's what we're looking at, being able to have those kinds of technologies, those kinds of ideas. We believe that there is a better future for us. We believe that we're inspiring an inclusive collective ambition for humanity. It's a mission to achieve human interstellar flight within the next 100 years. It's a journey to design to enhance life here on Earth. We went to, Eugene Cernan said, we went to the moon, and in fact, we discovered the Earth. And the question we have to ask now is, what will we discover from another star? That is our purpose. That's what we're looking for, that possibility in being able to do that. Thank you very much, and I'd like to take any questions you have.
We have time for a few questions. Anybody interested, please go to the microphone.
You've done a very persuasive presentation that I could summarize as saying it's not just about the rockets. There's a lot of other stuff involved.
Exactly.
Freeman Dyson gave a talk that you probably may have heard a couple days ago, and his claim is it's going to be a lot about the botany.
About the what?
Botany, plants.
Okay.
Plants are the colonizers. We come after the plants. We eat roughly 200 times our own weight in dry food during our lifetime, and a starship is going to be more about crop space than people space. And I'm wondering whether, you mentioned agriculture in one slide, you mentioned something connected with food somewhere else. I'm wondering whether there's any more focus on that than the 100 other topics. It's not just the 100-year Starship, it's the 100-discipline study.
Oh, well, I like that, the 100-discipline study. So one of the things that I'm working very hard on is to help look at this in terms of a capabilities map, and then a knowledge map of what we have now. And so then they can blend and go. I don't want to necessarily say one thing is more important than the other, because if you're able to do one thing, if we were able to figure out a really incredible, sustainable system, then you could go much slower, right? So we really look at it as a knowledge and capabilities map. When we went to the European Union, and we're continuing to work with them, we were invited to help sort of start looking at some of the budgeting ideas for Horizon 2020. There are a number of people that went with us to talk about it. And of course, we had someone who was looking at microbes and stuff. I think it's microbes, then plants, right? Then people, if you want to do a hierarchy of things. But we are definitely looking at those kinds of issues. We're a year and a half old, so we're trying to develop these kinds of things out, but we advocate for being able to understand those issues. I would even say that there are all kinds of ways to do it. It may be a plant, plants can be single cells, they can be multicellular, just like meat, animals can. I think one of the most controversial issues we had on our forum is whether or not we have to be vegetarians. Right? Because it takes you, first you have to feed the cow, then you eat the cow. I mean, it's a whole lot of energy and other things in there. Maybe you need to be vegetarians. So yes, those questions have to come up, and we really definitely will keep things in the forefront. There's no way I'll ever let any of the pieces slide away.
How do we avoid having an interstellar journey be the equivalent of the Apollo, where you had a one-shot flight, or a small number of flights, and then we stopped going, or like what China did in the early 15th century when they sent out fleets, and then 20 years later they stopped?
So the question is, how do we avoid just having sort of a one-shot thing and then you never do any more? Mm-hmm. So when we were putting together the idea about 100-year Starship, we had a number of pillars that we said have to eventually be sort of a part of the organization to be able to make sure certain things happen. Those pillars include purpose, right? We are going to space, right? It had to do with being audacious, which means that you can't be afraid of risk. and you know something may happen, but you have to be willing to take those risks. Doesn't mean being foolish about it. There was discipline, being able to go back and measure and understand what you do, enhancing life on Earth. I think that's a really key one, because as long as you're applying things to everyday life on Earth, you make a really big difference. And then knowledge as well, and I forgot some of the other pillars. There were 9 of them. Energy was one of the pillars. Energy. So energy, both physical and philosophical, right? Energy. To be able to keep the energy around the particular project. I think that's the way you do it, by showing that there's a benefit. I think it's by keeping in communication. This is where I'm going to say that I think if you're talking to the Starship, if you're getting things coming back, then that makes a difference. But in the long run, it's hard to foresee what happens in the future. But it's only going to work if we have it somewhat, some kind of way, people feel that it's part of where our lives are going, that it's part of human destiny in some real sense. And then I'm going to add one other thing. There was a really interesting paper at the DARPA Symposium in 2011 called The Weight Equation. And the paper basically said that if you don't pass the first Starship that you sent out, you've waited too long. Because there's so many things that you have to learn from trying to mount a mission that should make your next mission that much better. So I think those are some of the ways that help to ensure that it has its longevity. That you don't wait to get it perfect.
Do you think it's possible, once we leave our solar system, that we on this rock will see ourselves as Earthlings, and that could lead to an outbreak of world peace?
So here's the thing. I think, now I'm going to go, there are 2 sides of me. There's the cynical side and there's the optimistic side. Who are we going to go first? I'm going to go with this. Okay, so I'm going to blend them together. If we don't figure out how to think of ourselves as having a joint Earth future, we won't be around. So when people ask me, like, for example, Dr. J, what happened when you went up in space? What did you feel like and stuff? I always tell folks, it affirms something I always believed. The Earth was incredibly beautiful from space. You've seen the pictures people have been. It's just this thin, shimmering layer of light that's our atmosphere that protects us and it was just incredibly gorgeous. And it made me realize that the strength and the beauty of the Earth and the stars, it will always be here, right? The moon, we might not be. Because we get confused when people say save the Earth. We don't have to save the Earth. We just have to make sure that we don't work in such a fashion that it develops a system that doesn't support our life form. So that's a really important piece. So we're going to have to figure that out. Otherwise, we won't be here. And there's a last part. This is the cynical versus the optimism. One of the people that we've been working a little bit with, Mark Millis, mentioned that at the symposium in Brussels, is that if we don't figure out how to get along, if we actually develop the kind of energy capabilities that are needed to power a starship, we could destroy ourselves. So in some ways, it's something that we need to do and figure out. Again, the long pole in the tent is human behavior in all of that. The final part that I would add to that is we believe that all the capabilities that are needed for a successful interstellar mission are all the capabilities that are needed to sustain ourselves as humans here on this planet. So they're very sort of, in my mind, inextricably linked. The long pole is human behavior. And hopefully we can find some aspirational thing that allows us to get our adrenaline rush and do good too.
Thank you.
Dr. J, I'm going to put a plug for the NSS. I hope you've noticed that we're working on these topics within the NSS. You have? Okay, good. Because we have advanced concepts and breakthrough science and technology. We have a new health committee. And I wonder if you would be open to the idea of 2 starships. Because you have the 100-year Starship going out, and we're talking about starting one here, okay? And parallel to yours. In other words, we'll start a community here on Earth. We'll do everything you're doing in space, okay, on your Starship, but we're going to be doing it here on Earth. You follow me? And then
not really sure.
Here's the challenge. In the 95th year of this, we're going to take off and we're going to meet you and pass you, because we're going to figure out the FTL thing and do that. Would you be open to that challenge?
I'm not exactly sure what the challenge is, and I never sign a contract that I don't read first.
That's your cynical side.
So that's one of those we're going to have to talk about offline, because I'm really not sure what it means. But I think that, again, our issue is making sure that there is the right atmosphere. I believe from all my time with NASA, the time I've been outside of NASA before, my interest in space exploration, that one of the biggest issues is about inclusion. And I am dedicated and committing to make sure that we start to reflect what goes on this planet, the full range and breadth, not just ethnicity and gender and geography, but disciplines and other things. And so it's never one organization's not going to be able to do this or make these kinds of things happen. So I'm not really sure how that reflects on what you said and faster than light. Of course, we're talking about faster than light. There are lots of things that go into this. So we should have the conversation offside, but I think that there's always an open.
You're on.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I have a strong belief in the wisdom of children, and I think if I'm imagining what a child would say to some of the problems about which microorganisms do we take, what will we wear. I think a child might say, but isn't that why Kepler is discovering Earth-like planets, and maybe once we get out there, we will just accidentally discover an Earth-like planet. So I'm thinking that perhaps we should consider that and add that to part of our discussion, because we feel strong at the family reunion every year when we get together, but then when we go back home, we have to face all these challenges. Oh, well, your bones will disappear in space. You don't want to do that. And so I think the hope, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the great hope is that we will be able to discover and get to Earth-like planets with all the things that we're accustomed to. Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna add something to it. I think children bring a very hopeful view, but as adults, we determine what happens in the world. And one of the things that I'm very concerned about is very often as adults, we said, well, the children are gonna fix it. No, they're not. Because we're gonna mess things up so much that they can't fix it. They learn the behavior from us. They learn the divisive behavior. They learn the disregard for nature. They learn the disregard for themselves and their intuition from us. So we as adults have to start changing ourselves and our behavior, because children, James Baldwin said, children rarely do what their parents tell them to do, but they seldom fail to imitate them. So we need to really change our behavior. So yes, I see that there's a hope. Then but we have to change what we're doing. We have to think in a way that moves us forward. The other part about an Earth-like planet, if there's an Earth-like planet, there are probably Earth-like things on it, and whether or not we're welcome is another question. And the other part of that is we still have to think about the microbes and stuff, because even just within our planet, when we saw different cultures come together, they had different microbes and stuff. Some of them were transferred purposefully, some not purposefully, but we know that there can be a difference in terms of that whole content. So I think it's really a holistic view that we have to look at, that we have to pay attention to, and always making sure that we approach things with that childlike wonder and openness. That's what we need to keep inside of ourselves, as well as including children. I'd love to see if we have the capacity to show the video. We have the technology. And I really want to thank you now.
From the first moments of human history, we have gazed in awe at the infinite sweep of the heavens. The stars formed our creation myths and cultures. The stars have witnessed every human achievement and each foible that has set us back. And they're still up there, waiting for us to advance enough to reach them. Once, we relied on the stars to navigate the Earth. Now, we're leaving the Earth to navigate the stars. Humanity and our planet stand at an inflection point. Will we continue on our current path of short-term thinking, A path that appears safe but flirts with stagnation? Or do we come together and push for humanity's next giant leap forward? At 100 Year Starship, we are calling on members of our generations to complete a clear mission. Make the capabilities for human travel to another star a reality within the next 100 years. Because just as past exploration pushed breakthroughs in agriculture, communications, energy, transportation, materials, and medicine, the greatest rewards of interstellar travel will be felt here at home. We believe that pursuing an extraordinary tomorrow will create a better world today. And who participates makes all the difference. Join us on this audacious journey. The road to another sun won't be easy, but if it were, we wouldn't grow. No matter how hard things have gotten, no matter how dark, humans have never failed to look up. Up for inspiration, up for endless possibilities. With a humble craft hurtling toward a distant star, built by the best hearts, minds, and hands, we'll discover a better version of ourselves and bring a brighter, more harmonious, more sustainable life to the future generations who will call our beautiful blue planet their home.
Thank you all very much.